Which one is it? This? Where is it? بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا اللهم زدنا علما إنك أنت عليم حكيم اللهم اجعل هذه المحاضرة حجة لنا لا حجة علينا يا رب العالمين أما بعد. This is our first class, inshallah, the book or understanding of the Quran. Before we get started, we have a few people there. Before we get started, has anyone ever heard the subject Ulum al-Quran or the science of the Quran or Ulum al-Tafsir or sciences? They're two different things, Ulum al-Quran and Ulum al-Tafsir. We're not going to get into a lot of the details of it, but we're going to primarily discuss Usul al-Tafsir. What is Usul al-Tafsir? What do you think it is? And the sisters can answer, so what do you think it is? The general principles of tafsir. Okay. What does that mean though? The general principles of tafsir.
In regards to like deriving, like how can I put it, like the way of deriving the evidence for the tafsir.
The way of deriving the evidence for tafsir. Okay. It's going to get a little more detailed than that. This is the conversation that we have with a lot of people, right? Before you speak about any subject, first of all, you understand how people, they have differences of opinion and disagreements, right? We disagree, right? People argue, they fuss, they disagree. The question is, what's the primary reason why people argue and disagree? What's the primary reason? Well, what could be from the primary reasons why people will argue and disagree? You said one shaykh. No, we're not even talking about. We're talking about it just in general. When people disagree, and why? What are some of the reasons why people disagree? Like, what are some of the reasons why people would disagree? And it's real basic. It's real basic. Why do people, huh? Okay, so right now, you're speaking about in terms of the deen, right? Let's take it in a more general sense. Why do people disagree? Okay, believe it or not, one of the primary reasons why people differ is because they differ in their understanding of the words that they're using. It sounds real simple, right? But if you notice, a person may have a problem with their spouse, for example. Says, my wife, she's disrespectful. To you, you feel disrespected. From her, she's like, well, I don't disrespect you. Because now the problem now is they both define disrespect to be different things. So, in studying Islam, in any science, before you get into the subject matter, we have to agree on terminology. Does that make sense? So, for example, I'll give you an example. Let's bring it back into the realm of deen, right? So we'll say, Fulan says that he's an innovator, right? What's the definition of being an innovator? What does that mean? You don't know. The person talking doesn't know. The one that's listening doesn't know. And so now people adopt a meaning, but they don't know what it means, right? Well, let's say, for example, don't pray at whatever the case may be. If a person comes up with a reason why you can't do something and you don't understand it, then you have problems because now you're confused, right? So to eliminate the confusion, when you study Islam from an academic perspective, you must agree on terms, right? So before you get into that subject, you must agree that Usul means this. Tafsir means this. This means that. That way, going into it, if we have a disagreement, we already agree on the terms, so we're not going to disagree with certain words. And you'll find this differences of opinion in tafsir. A lot of it, or some of it, comes back to understanding the language, what the words mean, etc. And we're gonna get into that, inshallah ta'ala. Any questions about that so far? No questions. Right. So the primary book that we're going to be coming from, and we're going to use this as a source. However, everything is not going to come from that particular text. We're going to be using a book that's translated. It's called Muqaddimah to Usul Tafsir. I think that's the name of it. Yes, Muqaddimah fi Usul Tafsir. It's a book that was authored by Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala. May Allah have mercy on him. However, when Shaykh al-Islam wrote this book, Ibn Taymiyyah, when he wrote this book, he did not title the book The Introduction to Usul Tafsir. That's not his title. Rather, that's a title that was given after it by one of the scholars of the fiqh of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. His name was Jamil al-Shaqwi. Jamil al-Shaqwi. He considered him from the ulama of the school of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. He actually gave that book that title. He gave that book that title, The Introduction to Usul al-Tafsir. And this book was written 1355 Hijri. Not Shaykh al-Islam's book, but Jamil al-Shaqwi rahimahullah. This book, and this is when he titled the book Muqaddimat al-Tafsir. Muqaddimat al-Tafsir, or Usul al-Tafsir. In addition to that, we'll also pull from some of the works in the introduction of it's called Jam al-Ahkam al-Quran from Imam al-Qurtubi. We'll come from that as well. We may also even pull some from Ibn Juzay in his tafsir, who was a Maliki scholar. And we'll also come from, obviously, Muqaddimat al-Tafsir from Shaykh al-Islam and other sources as well. However, we're going to use this as a primary text. And why is that? It's because it's translated in English. So it'll be easy to follow. Right. Any questions?
What's the name of the book again?
You want to show me the title? So we're gonna start by going into the first part of the introduction. Do we have this? Do we have the book in English? Yeah. We can do that, inshallah. Any questions before we start reading through the introduction of the topic? No. None. Right.
I do want to just make sure I'm correct. So Jamil, he changed the title.
No, I don't even think Shaykh al-Islam put a title. So
okay.
He came and put the title on it and called it Muqaddimah to Usul Tafsir, the introduction for the Usul of Tafsir. This is the book here. So if anybody can get this book, this is it right here. It'll help out, inshallah, as we go along. Now, we're not going to use this verbatim. We're not going to go through it verbatim, but it's going to be used as a guide. Okay? Qala Shaykh al-Islam rahimahullah ta'ala. So I actually studied most of this book with Shaykh Abdul Majid al-Subayl rahimahullah, or hafidhahullah, may Allah preserve him. Prior to graduating from the university, we actually went through this. So I have some ta'liqat or some notes from him that we took prior to coming back to the U.S. It says, Qala Shaykh al-Islam, and he mentioned, Shaykh Abdul Majid, he mentioned, وَهُوَ مِنْ أَشْرَفُ عُلَمَاءِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. He's from the scholars that have reached a really high status. Why would somebody call someone Sheikh al-Islam anyway? What does that even mean?
It's a scholar who has an understanding of vast areas of the religion.
And the reason why I say that is because now we use the term Sheikh real loosely nowadays, right? We use it loosely. But when we talk about people that have real knowledge, you have to identify it and recognize it, right? So Sheikh al-Islam is considered Sheikh al-Islam because he mastered many sciences of the religion, from aqidah to fiqh, usul, qawaid, etc. At any event, he says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Rabbi yassir wa'in bi rahmatik. He makes dua before he starts. And then we're going to go down into the text part, where he says, Alhamdulillah, نستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. To end up. This was part of this introduction. And then he says, فَقَدْ سَأْلَنِي بَعْضُ الْإِخْوَانِ. He said, some of my brothers, they asked me, أن أكتب لهم مقدمة تتضمن قواعد كلية تعين على فهم القرآن. So, before we get into this, the first thing we need to understand is, why is it important for a Muslim to understand the Quran? Why is it important? Or is it important? And if so, why?
Definitely important. All your, I guess you could say, evidences of reasoning for doing things, it should come from the Quran.
Good. So the Quran, we always hear Muslims say, we follow the Quran and the Sunnah. Yet when it comes to the Quran, we may have minimal knowledge of the Quran. Right? We may not even know how to understand it. In fact, there are Muslims that are terrorists in Islam. In Arabic, they're called irhadiyun. Some of them are terrorists, right? They also use the Quran. And they explain the Quran. And they convince people that are not learned in the Quran, they convince them in ways that may be incorrect in how to interpret it. Right? This is very important. We have people who, less of Allah, that some people that are misguided, people that have innovations in a religion, right? Don't think that they don't have their own explanation for the Quran. So then, when we talk about understanding the book of Allah, what's the best way to understand it? We're going to talk about that. What's the most accurate way in interpreting the book of Allah? We're going to understand that as well, inshallah. So he says, some of his friends, they wrote to Shaykh al-Islam and they asked him to write an introduction to them that will show them the general principles in understanding the Quran. They wanted to know some of the general principles they can use to understand the book of Allah. وَمَعْرِفَةَ تَفْسِيرِهِ وَمَعَانِيهِ. And so that they can understand the tafsir, meaning the meaning of the Quran. وَالتَّمْيِيزِ فِي مَنْقُولِ ذَلِكَ وَمَعْقُولِ بَيْنَ الْحَقِّ وَأَنْوَاعِ الْبَاطِلِ. Now here's also important. So what was going on during this time? It's also important to know. During this time, there were scholars of Islam, scholars of tafsir that understood the Quran. And then there were people who did not understand the Quran. Rather, there were people that didn't have knowledge, but they feigned knowledge. They acted as if they had knowledge, but they didn't. Kind of like the times we live in now, right? A lot of people claim knowledge, but maybe they don't have the knowledge, right? And then there is people who may have knowledge, right? So they said, they wanted to know the distinction between manqul dhalika wa ma'qulihi bayna al-haqqi wa anwa' al-batil. They wanted to know how to distinguish between the manqul. Manqul, it means the narrations that have been transmitted. So when you read the Quran, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions an ayah, and you get an explanation for that ayah, where did that explanation come from? This is called manqul, meaning the Sahaba heard it, and he told the students of the Sahaba, they told the students, and that's how it passed down to us. This is called manqul. The term in Arabic is called naql, meaning something that is transmitted from one person and is passed down to someone else. Transmitted from one person and passed down to someone else. And then we have ma'quli. Ma'qul means the things that are understood from it, right? The things that are understood based on the tools that a person can use to extract meanings from the Quran. And also to distinguish between the various levels of incorrect information. Let us stop right there. The average Muslim here in this town, for example, if someone says to you, don't go here, don't pray at this, people don't give salam to that, don't, right? Are you equipped? Are you as a Muslim equipped to say why this is falsehood and why it's not? Are most people equipped with that? No. So what happens is you fall into a category where you're following what someone else says, but you don't know why they said it. I don't know about you, but I don't like being in positions like that. That's dangerous. Somebody tell you to walk off a cliff, and you're like, well, why? Right? You don't want to walk off the cliff. But you'll do it because somebody told you that you're supposed to walk off a cliff. Right? So here, they wanted clarification. They wanted to have knowledge and understanding of that issue. And it says, وَتَنْبِيهٌ عَلَى الدَّلِيلِ الْفَاصِلِ بَيْنَ الْأَقَاوِيلِ. And they wanted to know, how do you distinguish between the various statements about the Quran? You have to understand, after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, many people coming out claiming various things. Now us, for example, we were alive during that time, as the average Muslim during that time, and you got 1,000 different people saying this is what this verse means. How would you know what's correct versus what's incorrect? And so they requested from one of the scholars, Shaykh al-Islam, for example, to give them rules to engage the Quran with. Okay? Our religion, there's nothing in our religion except that it has rules. Our religion contains rules and regulations. There are rules and understanding of Quran. Just like there are rules in understanding hadith, there are rules in understanding fiqh, there are rules in understanding tafsir. Every science in the religion of Islam, it has its own set of rules. I need you guys to really understand that. So what that means is, sometimes the rules are shared between various sciences. Sometimes some of the rules are shared between various sciences, and sometimes they are not. And sometimes they are not. And we want to cover some of that, inshallah ta'ala. The next thing he said, Shaykh al-Islam, he said, فَإِنَّ الْكُتُبَ مُصَنَّفَ فِي التَّفْسِيرِ مَشْحُونَةٌ بِالْغَثِّ وَالسَّمِينِ وَالْبَاطِلِ وَاضِحِ وَالْحَقِّ الْمُبِينِ. He said these books about tafsir, they have some things that are made up, fabricated, false, and some things that are correct. As a Muslim looking, you want to know, well, how can I distinguish between that which is correct versus that which is incorrect, right? How do I get to understand that? So Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, that was the reason why he put this book together, to give the Muslim the tools to be able to understand or to begin to understand some of the meaning of the Quran. Any questions about that? Go ahead. You sure? Because we're about to get into a part here that I need you all to really pay attention to. What page? I don't know what page this is. It's page 9. No, turn to page 12. So we're going to start from page 12. And for your own time, obviously you can read the explanation from Sheikh Uthaymeen during your own time, but we're primarily coming from the text. Okay? Right. So, the Shaykh al-Islam, rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, وَالْعِلْمُ, and now he's going to explain to everyone, what is knowledge? What is knowledge? So before we read and understand what Shaykh al-Islam is saying, what is knowledge to you? What is it? And we have to use some real examples, right? We have to use some real examples, right? So for example, if I say, Saeed's on falsehood, Saeed Abu says he's on falsehood, for example, let someone Allah, right? Allah protect and preserve. But for example, if I said he's not, you shouldn't listen to him, he's off it, right? If I say those things about this man, that means I should have what? I should have knowledge, right? Is that a requirement? It's a requirement. If I say something about the Quran, if I say Allah says this and this is what this means, it should be backed with some what? Knowledge. I can't just say something about something and not know what I'm talking about. Is that fair? Is that being honest? No, it's not. If I speak about something and I don't have any knowledge of the thing I'm talking about, what do you call that? Ignorance, foolish, right? So, when it comes to Islam, Islam holds people accountable. Islam holds people, we're not perfect. No one's perfect. No one claims to know everything. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to misunderstand things. It happens, right? That's part of being human, right? But the problem comes is that when knowledge comes your way, you have to respect it and understand it. If you don't understand it, you ask questions so that you can learn. So here Shaykh al-Islam, he says, وَالْعِلْمُ إِمَّا نَقْلٌ مُصَدَّقٌ عَنْ مَعْصُومٍ. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, he said that knowledge is نَقْلٌ مُصَدَّقٌ عَنْ مَعْصُومٍ. A naql, we mentioned what naql was, meaning it was something that was transmitted to us. So for example, let's make it clear. Muhammad heard from Ibrahim, who heard from Ishaq, who heard from Idris, who heard from Ali. Or Ali said this, or whatever, right? There's a naql, there's a chain of transmission of the conversation of who said what. And it says, an ma'asum. An ma'asum means the one that is protected from a mistake. Meaning it can't be incorrect. Like for example, the Quran. Like for example, if the Prophet ﷺ says something, well, ma'asum as it relates to the text and understanding of the book and the sunnah. Is that clear? That's one part. Is that part understood? Okay, so now we're going to move to the next part. If you could put a comma there. In the next part it says, وَإِمَّا, or قَوْلٌ عَلَيْهِ دَلِيلٌ مَعْلُومٌ. Or it's a statement that a person makes about something with evidence that is known. So for example, if I tell you, let me say it again. Or it's a statement that a person makes and the evidence to support that statement is known. Meaning, people know what the evidence is to support that statement. So for example, let's go back to Brother Saeed. If I said, Brother Saeed's an innovator, don't pray with him, don't go to his masjid, don't go to his center, he's upon falsehood. That's a statement, right? Now, if a person in a position of teaching, if they're making statements like this, the understanding is that they have knowledge, right? They know what they're talking about. So if you make a statement like that about this brother, it says, قَوْلٌ عَلَيْهِ دَلِيلٌ مَعْلُومٌ. Then there should be some evidence to support the statement that I'm making. What happens is people have no evidence. They have no evidence. What is evidence anyway? When we talk about the religion of Islam, what is evidence? For example, what proof? What is proof that I can say that this brother is an innovator? May Allah protect him from the enemy. to say that this brother's an innovator, what evidence do I need to be able to make that statement? Call Allah. I mean, Allah said. So you want to find an ayah that says Allah saying he's an innovator?
But I was going down the chain.
Let's go. Go down the chain.
Call Allah, Rasulullah, so
Allah said, the Prophet ﷺ said, or the Sahaba. But you're not going to find a statement in any of them against him. So how do we make a statement against him being an innovator? What do we need?
His statements against the Prophet Allah.
So what if he doesn't say any statements against Allah or his Prophet ﷺ? How else can we deem him to be an innovator? How long have you been Muslim? 2007. Alhamdulillah. How many years? 14 years?
Practicing.
No. You've been Muslim. You know, inshallah, Allah make you from the people of Jannah. I mean, right? How many years you been Muslim? 15 years. Right? How about you? Your whole life? A long time. We're not going to get no practice. So are you telling me at one point in time you consider yourself not to be Muslim? All right. Let's leave it at that. Huh? What about you? 2005. So you're almost 15, 16 years, right? Right. How many times have you heard of such and such as an innovator? You heard that? You ever heard that before? Brothers and sisters are innovators. Don't give them salams. Don't do this. Don't do that. You heard this before? All right, you hear it now. I don't hear it anymore, but I don't mix no circles. But what I'm saying is, I don't. What I'm saying is, if somebody's an innovator, it must be something that's making them innovative, right? It must be something that's making them innovative. What could possibly make a person innovative? Say again? What you say? Actions. Well, what type of actions? What actions make a person innovative? Understand something, because these are real life questions. Remember we said in the very beginning, before we talk about a subject, we must agree on a terminology, right? In order for someone to be an innovator, what has to be established? What evidence? So the very first thing is we have to understand what is bid'ah. What is innovation? If you don't even know what innovation is, how can you call somebody else innovative? That's number one. Number two, if a person made a mistake, made an error, committed an error, etc., does that make him an innovator? It depends. Bro.
What I'm saying, if we agree with it,
right,
and we know that the person that didn't do that,
right. So here's the thing. A person can fall into an innovation but not be an innovator. You understand that? Is that clear? A person can fall into an innovation but not be considered an innovator. That's number one. Number two, in order for that person to be labeled as such, an innovator, etc., there are many things. But from those things is that that person must go against an usul min usul ad-din, meaning they must go against a consensus, an ijma', a consensus from the scholars. So let's say, for example, the Sahaba agree that this is the position, and that person clearly goes against that, opposes that, understand that it's going against the ijma', etc., etc. Then we can start talking about possibly labeling this person an innovator if all of the prohibitions are removed, right? Because the origin is that you don't want to go around labeling Muslims innovators. In fact, as the scholars discuss, you have to look for things to take that person away from being an innovator. You have to look for every possible excuse. We don't rush to judge a Muslim and say, these Muslims are not on what's correct. You're quick to say that. This is dangerous, right? And without getting into much detail, we did a lecture on this a couple of years ago about innovation, etc. At any event, and then he says, وَمَا سِوَى هَذَا فَإِمَّا مُزَيِّفٌ مَوْضُوعٌ. He said, whoever has information that is not supported by dalil, meaning evidence from the Quran or the Sunnah, or he said it is muzayyifun mawdu, meaning it is weak, it's falsehood, and it is thrown away. So if I tell you that this brother here is an innovator, and I don't have anything to support it, what should you do? Toss it. Throw it away. Throw it away. Right? He says, وَإِمَّا مَوْقُوفٌ لَا يُعْلَمُ أَنَّهُ So here it says, وَإِمَّا مَوْقُوفٌ لَا يُعْلَمُ أَنَّهُ بَهْرَةٌ وَلَا مَنْقُولٌ. It said, then there's a third type. The third type is we don't know whether this information is correct or incorrect. We don't know whether this person embellished, they fabricated it, or whether it's correct. Now understand something here. This here specifically, in general, we're talking about what we mentioned. But specifically here, we're talking about tafsir of Quran. So we have, for example, we have a time in the past when we spoke about tafsir, right? So some tafsir, we may get them, they come from various sources, right? So what's the best form of tafsir? Does anyone know?
The best form?
Yes. Meaning, the best explanation of the Quran is what? With the Quran. The first form is Quran with the Quran. And we're going to talk about that. The second form is the Quran with Sunnah. And we're going to go on the list. But as it relates here to the statement of Shaykh al-Islam, he says, إِمَّا نَقْلُ مُصَدِّقٌ مَعْصُومٌ. The first thing, it says that when he's talking about ma'soom, meaning the statement or the verse is protected from any possible mistake or error. We mentioned that, right? And then he says the next one, وَإِمَّا قَوْلٌ عَلَيْهِ دَلِيلٌ, or the statement it has dalil, evidence. This evidence comes from ijtihad. What is ijtihad? No, ijtihad is when a scholar looks at the evidence and they come up with a ruling based on rules. They don't come up with a ruling based on the error. They come up with a ruling based on rules and regulations on how to arrive at that particular rule. Does that make sense? We'll talk about that in a little more detail later on. Right. And then the third part, he says here, it says, Imma mawquf. So there are some verses in the Quran that are mawquf, meaning the scholars stopped when interpreting. They didn't give a clear meaning on what it means, right? For various reasons. From those reasons, for example, if we find statements from Ka'b al-Ahbar, right? Ka'b al-Ahbar, he was a person who accepted Islam after the death of the Prophet ﷺ. He was a Christian. And they said that when he would come, he would bring narrations from the people of Al-Kitab. So if you ever look through Ibn Kathir, you may read some narrations that they're called Israeliyat. You may have seen those. And anything is that in English? Israeliyat, it says that? Right. So if it says that in the tafsir of Ibn Kathir in English, they came from this direction, right? Because he came, a lot of the Sahaba or a lot of the Tabi'in, those narrations that may support Islam or may necessarily be opposed to it, right? So what happens is, in these situations, they say that we are mawquf, meaning we stop with our interpretation of it. Now, Ahbar, or Ka'b al-Ahbar, his statements would be accepted if it agreed with Islam. Meaning, if we found what he says to be true from a hadith or the Prophet ﷺ supported narrations, then we accept it. If we don't find anything to accept it, we don't automatically reject it unless we find something that clearly opposes it. Does that make sense? So then from that standpoint, we're very cautious when it comes to accepting those narrations. And this is important because you're going to find that throughout the explanation of the Quran. Right, any questions?
When we say ijma, like, what is the definition of ijma? Like, because I hear a lot
One says. So the brother said, when we say ijma, what is the definition of ijma? So when we say ijma, we're talking about consensus, right? So when you hear people say ijma or consensus, what do they mean when they say it?
That's where it's confusing, because I don't know when they say it, they talk about this scholars at a specific time. Like,
Well, when you hear people say it, how are they using it?
usually it's like when you say evidence is from the Quran, assuming that ijma is something, like somebody would say something like that.
So when they say it, the people that you talk to, how do they use it?
Yeah, ijma is something like they say that.
So what is the salaf? Remember we said we gotta agree on what? We gotta agree on terms. What is the salaf? Who are the salaf? All right. In general, so here's the thing, right? In every subject, we have definition and we have terms. So for example, if you were a medical student, the terms that you will use is still English, right? But it means something different in the medical field than it does in the street. When we say understanding of the salaf, it has a general meaning, and then when it comes to fiqh and usul and the fundamental principles of the deen, it takes a different meaning, right? So when we say consensus of the salaf, as it relates to the term ijma' or consensus, then this consensus of the salaf is referring to the sahaba. Why is that? First of all, what is the definition of consensus anyway? Consensus means that all of the people during a particular time period agreed on a particular rule, and no one opposed it. So it became law. This is consensus, right? So the strongest position, according to the scholars of usul al-fiqh, they say that the strongest position of consensus happened during the time of the companions. Only, meaning there cannot be a consensus after that. Why not? Why can't there be a consensus after the companions? Why not? Because they say, what's the definition of consensus? All of the scholars must agree on a particular issue. All of them. Not 7 out of 10, not 8 out of 10, not 9 out of 10. That is 10, that is 10 out of 10. Right? So why can't there be ijma' or consensus after the companions? Why not? Huh? Not that they passed away. Is the question clear? It's clear? Why can't there be consensus after the companions? Okay, I'm going to give some context to it, right? During the life of the Prophet, ﷺ, where were the companions? Why is it impossible to reach consensus right now today? Why? No. During the time of the Prophet, ﷺ, the companions were in one place, right? They were where? In Medina, and then they spread out, right? After the death of the Prophet, ﷺ, and then the companions spread to different lands, then they raised other scholars and other scholars. So when issues came up, what is the likelihood of all of those scholars from all them different lands at the same time agreeing on a particular issue? Is that possible? It's impossible. So because of that, the scholars say that ijma' outside of the companions is muhal, yani mustahil. It's impossible. How much more so today? How much more so today? Right? It's impossible to get all of the scholars from around the world to agree on one issue. Yes.
Is that specific? Like, is that restricted
Restricted to what?
Like, see, this because like in Saudi Arabia, right? They make consensus.
No, they don't.
They don't?
No.
I'm talking about for religious affairs.
Well, what other affairs are you talking about?
I mean, they got governmental affairs that the prince.
No. They don't make consensus. They might give verdicts or fatwa, but those are not consensus. There's a different terminology. The brother said in Saudi Arabia they come up with consensus, but that's not true. They're not allowed to do that. You can't just come up and say, okay, we us 7 scholars agree on this issue, and that was a consensus in the deen. No, it doesn't work like that. No, it doesn't work like that. Islam is way too complex for that.
So is it fair to say today ijma is?
It doesn't exist. Yes, it doesn't exist. In fact, we have books where they're not written. What are the issues that they have ijma in? Yes, there are books written that. Sorry. When he says ijma, meaning is it possible that they could come up with an ijma on an issue today? That's what he's talking about.
Like, I'm not saying it's eradicated. I'm saying like,
no, so ijma exists, but we can't come up with an ijma on a new issue today. I'll give you an example. There was a flyer that came out in Ramadan. What was it? You told me about it? The Eid. Okay. What was it called? The what? The interfaith iftar. You guys hear about that?
Yeah.
What is an interfaith iftar? What is that? Is it bid'ah? Sister said what? Don't whisper. What is an interfaith iftar? What is that?
It's different religions coming together. Jewish, Christian.
So Jewish, Christian, whatever, they all come together for iftar during Ramadan, right? I'm only mentioning this because he mentioned this to me earlier today, right? Is that a bid'ah? It sound like a bid'ah? Inshallah. Like, what kind of bid'ah is that? Is it bid'ah mufassiqa, mukaffara? Is it bid'ah that take you outside of Islam, or is it bid'ah that you get a sinful deed? And where's the bid'ah? I don't know what it is. That's the point. What's the definition? Remember, we have to go back to definition. What is the definition of a? What was it? What's it called? Interfaith iftar. What is that?
I think it's simple.
You think it's sinful? MashaAllah. Where's it said? So let's get it. Let's have some tasweer, right? They say al-hukm ala shay, and it's the qaida al-din. Al-hukm ala shay far'un an tasawwuri. In order to give a ruling on any issue, you must have proper tasawwur. You have to be able to envision the issue. What is it in and of itself, right? So what I understand from the issue is the Muslims are having iftar and some non-Muslims were invited. That's what I understand from it. What do you understand from it? Huh? Interfaith. So the Muslims are having the iftar, and you have Christians and Jews, whatever other religion, they're all there with the Muslims while they're having the iftar. Where's the saying that? I never heard of it before, but it's something that took place. Is that simple?
If it's described the way you said it.
Wow, how else could it be?
It could be they could have a dialogue where they up there talking and they talking parent religion. I've seen it happen before.
Right. So the issue is this. Now, listen to what I'm saying. So here's the issue. Listen to what I'm saying. Is interfaith haram? Before we talk about that, what's the definition of interfaith? What does it mean? Having dialogue with other faiths? That's my point. The moral of the story is al-hukm ala shay far'un an tasawwuri. In order to be just, to give a proper verdict on something, you must know what that thing is first in detail. You might look at the title, the title sounds iffy. But what is it? If you don't know what it is, how can you speak about it if you don't know what it is? Huh? How can you open your mouth to say, you said, it's haram.
No, I said it.
That's what you said. Don't moonwalk, Shay. You said it was haram.
I said it sounds.
Oh, it sounds haram.
Yeah, I said it sounds.
Well, where we live at, if something sounds haram, it is what? It's haram. I'm just saying, if you say, listen, if Listen, you gotta understand the people, man. If you say something that sounds hard, this brother here is gonna walk out. It is hard. And then he's gonna tell somebody it is hard. And then that's what it becomes. I'm not saying it is or it isn't. What I'm telling you is that in order to give a verdict on something, you must have proper tasawwur, meaning you must have proper understanding of what that thing is. What that thing is, right? What does it mean? So, for example, what is the definition of interfaith? What's the ruling on that? To the end of it, what is it? What's happening? What's taking place? A scholar of Islam does not give a verdict on something being halal or haram until they dissect that thing, until they break it apart and understand what it is. Is it opposing any principles from the religion? Yes or no? If it is, then you be clear. It's opposing this principle here. Okay? Does that make sense? And I only mention that because he and I were discussing this earlier. What is it? What is it? What's it called? An interfaith iftar. What does that even mean? What does it mean? I don't know what that means. But as a Muslim, it's always better to put the best spin on something as opposed to putting the worst spin on it. Does that make sense? It's always better, as when we deal with Muslims, it's always, if there's a possibility to put a positive spin on it, then it's better to do that than to go along saying that something is automatically haram, write it off, and you don't even know why it's haram, if it is, right? Any questions about that? Is that clear? Yes. You did a Google search?
Sheikh Google, yeah.
Right, what did Sheikh Google say?
Based upon the terminology of what it means, like for what we know, when you said the word, automatically my antennas went up.
Right.
Even though I didn't have but from living in this land, the meaning of interfaith, when Muslims come together, and I'm saying most of the masajids I seen do it, they're accepting, like they're giving them a platform a lot of times. Like Sufis did it in California, I seen it like a while ago.
Listen what I'm saying. I don't know the details. What I'm telling you is that in order, interfaith may have, whoever used that term, they may have a specific meaning of what they intend by it. Does that make sense? However, having dialogue with other faiths is not a problem. It's not a problem. Having dialogue, right? You live in a place where you are the minority. How many people have non-Muslim family members? Do you have dialogue with them?
Yeah.
Can you call that interfaith?
No.
Why not? Based on your definition.
Well, on my understanding is that I'm not a caller to the religion, so listen what I'm saying. Listen what I'm saying, Sheikh. Now you're coming up with rules now, right? What I'm saying is, if they're involved in interfaith, what is interfaith? What does it mean? What are the rules related to it? Right? Are you compromising aspects of your religion or no? Are you being forced to worship something other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or no? Are you in a position to call and educate or no? You have people, for example, Muslims that are chaplains in prisons, right? You are, as a Muslim chaplain in a penitentiary, they're paying you, you have to facilitate over other religious services. Is that interfaith? You have to preside over it. You have to ensure that other people can worship however way they want to worship. Does it make it okay because you get paid for it? All right. Well, the moral of the story is that considered interfaith? Right, you got to be real careful how you use terms, right? The whole moral of the story is when we speak about something, we have to understand what it is we're talking about. And this is why it's not for every person to give verdicts. It's not for you to say, if they say, okay, you're having an interfaith iftar. You might say, man, it sounds sketchy. I don't want to be involved in that. That's cool. I can respect that. Right? You don't understand it, I get it. You might have another Muslim say, oh, well, all they're doing is this. I understand because, for example, I was a part of the committee. And what they're doing is, whatever the case, they might see it to be okay, and they might not see they might not see a principle of the deen being violated here. Does that make sense? Whatever the case may be. The whole moral of the story is, when it comes to understanding the deen, we must have knowledge of what we're talking about. Just because something sounds funny don't mean it is funny. Something might sound straight, but it's really funny. All right? Allah Musta'an. Any questions? Yes.
No, basically just following you saying, pretty much you're saying, like you said, you don't have knowledge about the issue, even if it looks fishy. You make an excuse or
try to make an excuse, and for yourself, listen, and for yourself, if you're uncomfortable, don't involve yourself with it.
But it's not going to be the place that can say you can't do it.
In order for you personally to be able to tell another Muslim that what they're doing is haram and they can't do that, that means you must have what? Dalil. You gotta have some evidence. Our religion is not like everybody go for what you know. Like, it doesn't work like that. There's rules. The problem is no one wants to study the rules. That's too hard. Now I gotta study. Nobody wants to study. Nobody wants to put the work in. Everybody want a cookie cutter answer. They want to what they want to do is what people want to do is they want to buy a bunch of books, put in their house in English, and say, I'm cool with this student and that student, and the sheikh said, and that's it. That's not how you learn deen. If you want to be able to give verdicts, you must put the work in. Go study. All these people giving verdicts, go study. Nobody's stopping you. Yallah, bismillah. Go put the work in. Go study 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 15, 20 years. And then you come back and then you give those verdicts. Huh? You tell they can't pray in this mess and that. In order for you to be, you're not qualified to do that. And we're going to learn that as we study Ulum Tafsir. You're going to learn that there are rules. Every science has rules. And when we start studying this, we're going to learn the rules. You're going to realize that many of us should just be quiet. In fact, you're going to become scared because you're going to realize it's a possibility that you may have said some things that you shouldn't have said.
This little information today, I feel like.
Yeah, but the thing is, if you want to be in a position to say something, go put the work in. Put the work in. Don't talk me to death, go study. Don't go study. Every science has its rules, right? If you want to learn, if you want to be, let's say, you know what, I want that interfaith, I feel like it's haram and it is haram, and that's cool. Go put the work in, go study the rules, and then come back and bismillah, say whatever you want to say. Because then you qualify. Then you got some real knowledge under your belt. So that way you can stand in front of Allah with that. See, and this is another part that people fail to realize. You come out here and you give a verdict, this is haram, that's cool. What you're saying is that you're speaking on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on what's allowed on his deen and what's not. And if you're that confident, at least go study Islam to have something to help you. Don't sit back here and struggle with Al-Fatiha and you give verdicts. Make sense? Don't struggle with your Al-Fatiha and then go give verdicts. You're not qualified. Go get the necessary qualifications, come back, and you can say whatever you want to say. Because now, at this point, you should be confident and stand in front of Allah by speaking about other Muslims. You be comfortable standing in front of Allah, speaking about other Muslims being enemies. You earned that. Right? But the problem is people have been made to believe that you don't have to study. Especially now since you got Google. No, seriously, you got Google. Anything you want to know, let me just Google it real quick, and then that's what it is. That's not Islam. Islam, you got to put work in. Anything in life that you want to do and be successful at, it's not going to happen overnight. You got to put work in. You got to put the work in. You got to put the time in. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't rush to want to go study so I could tell somebody something that's haram and halal. Yeah, no, your intention should be to remove the ignorance from yourself and the people around you.
At the end of it, we're going to start with that, inshallah. Anybody have any questions? None?
Oh, quick question.
Yes.
When you said we had to establish like the terminology or something, does it also fall under like we have to understand what it means, like generally, and I guess from under the Sharia?
Mumtaz, that's an excellent question, right? Believe it or not, it depends on the subject. I'll give you an example. When it comes to studying usul fiqh, let's say when it comes to studying usul tafsir, right? And you come across a word in the Quran, there's a way in understanding that word. The first way to understand it is through the language. The second way to understand it is through the urf, or the customs of the people, and the third way is through the sharia. This is specific to the science of studying tafsir. However, when it comes to fiqh and giving rulings in the religion, something halal and haram, then the first way to understand it is through the sharia. The second way to understand it is through the customs of the people, and the third way to understand it is through what? The language. You see how it's opposite flip, right? But if you didn't study, you wouldn't know that. That makes sense?
He gave a benefit yesterday about picking up these books, reading them on your own, like trying.
Nah.
Yeah, you know that's what you mentioned yesterday.
Nah.
Right?
So next week, inshallah, we're going to give a lecture about the life of the student of knowledge and the reality of studying overseas. For some reason, I think people forgot that. You know, people get a platform and a microphone and they start talking. They didn't put the work in. You really got to put the work in. So, like I said, that was an excellent question you had. When it comes to studying, or when it comes to studying the science of tafsir, there's a different step process as opposed to studying halal and haram.
Real quick, does hadith fall under the tafsir as well?
No. Hadith has its own science. And this is another thing. When it comes to studying tafsir, and we're going to cover all this again, the chain of narration from studying tafsir might be strong to the scholars of tafsir. This is also very important. Each science has its own scholars. Each science has its own scholars. Some scholars are scholars of all sciences. Some scholars are not. Because you're a scholar of hadith does not necessitate that you are a scholar of tafsir, and vice versa. Just because you're a scholar of the Arabic language does not mean you're a scholar of hadith, or usul fiqh, or usul tafsir. Understand? All right. Because the chain that they use for tafsir, right? The chain of narration that they use from tafsir, to the scholars of tafsir, that chain may be authentic to them. If you study hadith, that same chain that they use for tafsir, that the scholars of tafsir say, yes, this is a strong hadith. This is a strong meaning of the ayah. The scholars of hadith may look at the same chain and say it's weak. We can't use this. If you don't know that, how will you be able to make a distinction? You won't. You understand? Islam is very detailed. But the problem is, you don't put the work in. You must put the work in. At any event, we're going to stop with that, inshallah. We'll pick up next week. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.